How's it going, everybody? This is Cameron White with White Light Astrology, and welcome back to your favorite weekly horoscope. What the fuck is going on in the universe for August 19th through August 26th of 2019? Thank you guys so much for being here and liking and sharing and commenting and subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you guys, and I'm so glad you guys can be here with me this week. Before we get started, I did want to make a quick announcement that I am going to be relaunching my Patreon, where you guys are going to be offered exclusive astrology content, early release on all of my videos, as well as a few other extra bonuses with that. However, that's going to be happening in the beginning of September, so make sure you guys are looking out for my posts about that. But let's go ahead and continue and move on to this week's highlights. This week, we have Mercury trining Jupiter, we have Venus entering Virgo, we have the Sun entering Virgo, and by the time we get into this weekend, we have Venus conjoining Mars in Virgo. Now, with this week starting off with that Mercury trine Jupiter, there's a lot of excitement here. There's a lot of fresh ideas now that Jupiter's direct, Mercury's out of shadow, and can finally start treading some new territory in Leo. However, as we go through the week and as Venus enters Virgo, Virgo season begins, and then Venus conjoins Mars, this is where the focus is not so much on the inspiration or the idea or the, that solar quality that anything in Leo can give us. Now that everything's going into Virgo, this is when it's kind of about going like, okay, this is Leo season's like, this is what I see and this is how it makes me feel. Virgo's like, all right, well, let's write that down. How do we be a little bit more specific about that? How do we clarify those things? So I think as we start to go through this week, the energy is kind of going from this just pure, I don't want to say just excitement, because that's not necessarily always about. But with all these Leo planets, it's really easy to put things into the light. It's really easy to express things, regardless if that's good or bad. And as we go into Virgo, this is where things get a little bit more specific. This is when we go into an earth sign. Things become a little bit more material and a little bit more tangible, a little bit more, not so up in the air and up in flames like, Leo season kind of brought. And I think as this week, once we get to the weekend when Venus conjoins Mars, this is kind of like understanding a little bit more of where we need to be specific and where we need to see the pinpoint stuff of, what we're doing with our lives with Mars in Virgo. And while Venus is in Virgo, it's kind of like, where do we need to really put the focus and where's that value coming from? I talked a lot about that in my monthly horoscope, so if you guys haven't checked those out already, make sure you do. But with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the horoscope. So today on Monday, on August 19th, we're going to be having the moon trine Jupiter and square Saturn almost simultaneously, and this is kind of weird, you know what I mean? While the moon's in Aries, it's kind of like, forceful, it's wanting to do, it's wanting to kind of combat, it's wanting to not necessarily be with your emotions. The moon in Aries is kind of like my emotions are ramping me up to charge up, to kind of direct, to initiate, to begin. And so as the moon's in Aries on Monday, it's kind of like, we have a nice little energetic start to the week. But as the moon's trining Jupiter, where it's giving us this hopeful optimism and this bigger picture involved with it, it's squaring Saturn at the same time. So like simultaneously, while we're excited and we have all this, fresh energy to work off of, at the same time, we're still getting hard walls, we're still getting hard blocks, we're still getting hard no's. And as the moon's squaring Saturn, it's kind of like, you can't just force your way through everything. It's kind of like, how do we, like a good way to put it is you can't just like, like you're not the Kool-Aid man. You can't just like burst through the wall and do whatever you want. It might be a little bit easier though to channel your energy to take down that wall one block at a time. And it'll be a little bit easier and a little bit better for you to find out where you can best direct your energy. And I think that's what's important about the moon in Aries is while you have this energy, while it's still going on, it's squaring Saturn, so there's some frustration there, which also kind of, creates the competition type vibe in Aries where it's like, oh, you think I can't? Well, I'm going to show you how I can. But as the moon's squaring Saturn, it's like, it's not about forcing yourself, where you're feeling resistance. It's like, how do we actually direct our energy in a better way? It's kind of like when you're at the beach and you're going swimming and you're getting ripped into the current, like you don't fight the current, you go with the current, and that'll help you get to the other side of it without, getting dragged into the ocean. And I think that's a good analogy for this Monday because it's like, we have this exciting energy to use, but at the same time, we can be getting these hard no's. So just keep that in mind as we start this week. But then as we go into Tuesday, when Mercury trines Jupiter, this is where, I talked about this in August horoscopes and September horoscopes. Now that Mercury is out of its shadow and in Leo, Mercury, the planet of communication, our ideas, our mindset, how we're vocalizing these and how we're vocalizing those things, is in a bright sign. It is in a sign that wants to express, it wants to, be heard or be seen is a good way to put it. And as it trines Jupiter, there's this, friendship of Jupiter and Sagittarius being like, you know what? There's a lot of possibilities here. There's a lot of room to grow here. And Mercury in Leo is kind of like, you know what? Where can I, because this is, again, Leo, this is about the self. This is about, your identity, how you, what your solar qualities are and what other people can see. Mercury in Leo is kind of like, what ideas do I have? How am I vocalizing things that express my true nature and that can help me formulate the ideas, or I guess the mindset is another way to put it, towards, if it's accomplishing a goal, if it's starting something new in your life, or whatever it is that you're going through. Mercury in Leo trining Jupiter is kind of like, while there's this room to grow, you might as well be confident that you can fulfill that room, because you just holding yourself down literally does nothing and it doesn't help you at all. So why even waste your time doing it? But also on Tuesday, on August 20th, is when we're going to have the moon in the later degrees of Aries start to trine Venus in Leo at the last degrees of Leo. And I think that this is going to be nice because while, Venus is still in Leo, it's combust underneath the beam. So it's hard to kind of like really feel that vibe of Venus and Leo, of being in the spotlight and feeling validated and seen and appreciated the way that we can maybe want right now. But as the moon's in the later degrees of Aries trining Venus, I think that this is kind of giving us like the validation we need from ourselves. Kind of like, hey, I'm emotionally charged up to do this thing, to go about this way, or to go about this thing in this way. And I feel confident about it. I feel good about it. And I feel the value that I need to feel in order to continue on that path in a positive way. And so while we go into, coming from Monday, where it was kind of like, how do we go around the wall more, easier is a good way to put it, or smarter, Tuesday we feel a little bit more confident. But then on Wednesday, on August 21st, is when the moon is going to enter Taurus, and as well, Venus will enter Virgo. And I want to hit on the moon being in Taurus first, because as the moon's going from the sign that's charged up, wanting to go, the moon's going into a receptive sign, about receiving, about, bringing things in, about connecting. And that's that sign of Taurus, that Venus-ruled sign. And as the moon goes into Taurus, of course, it will be conjoining Uranus. So there's this eccentric electricity. There's this vibe of, I don't want to say, because Uranus and Taurus isn't so like liberating as like, Uranus and Aries was. Uranus and Taurus is more of like, how do we innovate? How do we get past obstacles? And how do we, I made this analogy in my Uranus and Taurus video of, it's kind of like the icebergs are melting and you have to jump from one ice sheet to the other. And it's slippery, but if you just take your time jumping and you take that leap of faith and you just ground yourself as well as you can, you have a shot with this. But while as Venus goes into Virgo, this planet of love, of value, money, sex, Venus is wanting you to indulge. She's wanting you to connect with other people and connect to the things that bring you joy, that bring you value, that stimulate your mind. As she goes into the sign of Virgo, she's entering her detriment, which I talk a lot about in my monthly horoscopes. But I think what's important to notice here is the vibe change from Venus and Leo being appreciated just for being Venus and Leo versus Venus and Virgo being appreciated for executing specific details. Yeah, Venus is in Virgo. This is going to be harder than usual, meaning Venus doesn't have all of her tools. That doesn't mean Venus can't do her job the way that she needs to. So it's important to keep that in mind as you're kind of going throughout the next couple of weeks. Like it's not just going to come easily, or in Venus's case, gracefully. You're going to have to work for it. And if you have a lot of value in, that you're wanting to put in something, wherever Virgo rules in your chart, you have to put the time and dedication into that. And this is Venus. This is Venus. Like, it's the planet of value. You're really looking and enjoying whatever Venus is doing. And it's in Virgo. This is about the details. This is about the finer things. This is about, crossing off your to-do list of what to do every single day. This is about, checking off your list of what you need to get at the grocery store. And this is, this is the difference I like explaining with like Gemini and Virgo, the two Mercury signs. Mercury is kind of like the stock market. It's just yelling. Like, it's just information being received and getting put out. And that's, you get the message, you get the word, and then you can go on from there. Virgo is kind of like the idea of law. Like things are phrased in a very specific manner to where it's hard to find loopholes, and it actually hits on very specific, phrases and, examples, and you guys know what I'm talking about. And why I bring that up is because while Venus is in Virgo, it's kind of like, how do we write that sentence? How do we open our essay? And how do we begin? How do we start this with a sense of fun? Like if you're reading like an essay, you want to enjoy it, you know what I mean? If you're reading a book, you want to enjoy it. So how do we create beauty within this fine detail of words that can be a little bit monotonous and draining? Then on Thursday, on August 22nd, that's when we're going to have the moon in the later degrees of Taurus trine Saturn, as well as the moon's going to be squaring Mercury. And this is going to be kind of like agitating in a sense, because we have two fixed signs, the moon in Taurus, where it can be stubborn, and Mercury in Leo, where it can be stubborn, kind of like combating each other on the moon in Taurus being like, hey, I want things to feel, grounded. I want security. I want stability here. Mercury in Leo is like, fuck it, I'm going to do whatever the fuck I want and make it look grand and basically put it in the light that I want to, regardless of what the moon in Taurus says. But what is important here is the moon's trining Saturn. It's kind of like there's this overwhelming obligation to make things secure and stable. Like, I mean, it's no fucking shock that things aren't necessarily secure and stable right now with that Saturn South Node Pluto thing we've got going on. And as the moon's in Taurus, maybe it's time to kind of give into that and to listen to it a little bit and kind of go, hey, Mercury and Leo, you've got these great ideas and you're expressing things in this great way. How can we make that more simple? How can we make that more stable? And how can we express that same stuff but with more value and with more meat, with like some more weight to it? Then on Friday, on August 23rd, that's when we're going to have the moon enter Gemini and the sun enters Virgo, and Virgo season begins. Now, as the sun moves into Virgo, of course, this is the main luminary. This is the light. This is just bringing the attention to Virgo stuff. Like, it's time to do. It's back to school time. It's, summer's ending. Time to go back to work. Eventually, it's going to be here real soon. We're going to get into holiday season. And as the sun goes into Virgo, this is kind of like where we start taking in that harvest. It's not about enjoying summer, but about going, how do we switch from the summer vibe to the fall vibe? And as the moon goes into Gemini, we're going from that switch of, hey, I want things to be secure, I want things to be stable, I want to enjoy my indulgences. And the moon goes into Gemini, where it's kind of like, let's change that up a little bit. Now that, we took charge with the moon in Aries, we found some security with that with the moon in Taurus. The moon goes into Gemini, where it starts to get a few more ideas about how to go about things and is a little bit more expressive of how it feels with the whole situation. But as we go into this weekend, on Saturday, on August 24th, is when Venus is going to conjoin Mars in Virgo. Now, Mars is like focusing on what we're doing on the T. Like, it's so funny. Mars is my Time Lord this year, right? My malefic out of sect. And the second Mars entered Virgo, I was in the shower and I got a little speck of my body wash scrub in my eye, and it my eye was burning for 2 hours. And I thought that was a good analogy because this is Virgo. This is like tiny little things, and this is Mars, where we can start to get problems with tiny little details and that can kind of get in our way. It's kind of like you can have an analogy I've been using is kind of like, you can have a whole building, a whole skyscraper if you wanted to, but if one little thing is off in the calculation with that foundation, the whole fucking building's trash basically, and you have to start all the way over. So while Mars is in Virgo, there's problems with the specific tiny details, even though you're energized to go and do those things. Venus conjoining Mars is kind of like, what specific details do we not necessarily need? Venus in Virgo, wants the tiny details all to be beautiful and all to be perfect, but this is Venus' fault. She's not going to get that. So you kind of have to get to this point of where do we draw the line? What's worth taking our focus onto these tiny details that not necessarily are meaningless, but can take up a lot of time, and where do we need to actually put our value and our energy into other details? And also on Saturday, as the moon's opposing Jupiter, we get a little bit philosophical with this, because the moon's in Gemini being like, well, here's all of these answers and here's the information that I'm receiving. And Jupiter in Sagittarius is like, well, does this really fit with your overall grand scheme of where you're trying to grow into, of where you're trying to pursue, what you're trying to learn, whatever Jupiter is doing for you? The moon opposing it is kind of like, well, is this going to really work with that plan? And if not, what are you going to do to change that? And then on Sunday, we have the moon entering Cancer, where, I like that. I just brought up the idea of what do we need to focus on? Because the moon goes into Cancer. This is where our emotions get more focused on necessity. What is important? What do we need to protect? What needs to be, nurtured, and what needs to be, a good way to put it is literally like what is of necessity. And so as the moon goes into Cancer on Sunday, I think this is going to be a good time to reflect before we start next week on what our needs are and where we need to receive those. And then on Monday, on August 26th, when we are back at this video again, that is when we're going to have the moon applying to an opposition with Saturn, making it a little difficult for us to kind of be like, hey, this is what my needs are. How do I face the authority or the blockages in my life to access those needs, to protect those needs, and to defend those things? However, also on Monday is when Venus trines Uranus. And this isn't like, honestly, I don't think I've ever actually talked about this transit in my videos. But what I think is really interesting about Venus being in Virgo is, and this is Uranus in a Venus ruled sign, when we're like beautifying the tiny little details, we might find something. We might, change our minds about something, or we might see something that's kind of like, that's a little bit different. How can I be creative that Venus way about my innovation around those ideas, around what I just discovered? And so I think as we go into Monday, there's going to be this harshness of having to kind of like address needs and, face those obstacles. But there's also this excitement of when, it's kind of like looking through a microscope. If you're looking at your hand, you just see your hand, but through a microscope, there's cells and there's millions of them. And all of a sudden that leads you to discover, more things like biology. But that's how we get into Monday. As we go into next week we have Mercury entering Virgo. Thank God Mercury can get out of Leo because it's been there for way too long. And then we have the new moon in Virgo and Mars conjoining the sun and going Cazimi, restarting the whole Mars cycle for the next 2 years, which is pretty exciting. But that's what I got for you guys. I think next week is really going to start get more of that ball rolling again with all of the specific Virgo stuff. But that's this week. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for being here and liking and sharing and commenting and subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you guys, and I'll be seeing you next week.